Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Gordon, and this is another episode of the Training Corner. So last week we talked about coaches, and we talked about if a coach used the same sort of data collection module that you used and why that mattered and all those different sorts of things. But I also promised you that we would talk about data in this episode. What is it? What does it mean? And how can you collect it? Now, it's important to note that when we're talking about data, what we mean is information about how fast you run, information about how fast you cycle, information about how fast you swim, what your heart rate is at the time that you're doing the run and the time of they're doing the cycle, how many steps you're taking, and things like cadence and power, which are bike terms. Now, some of those terms are pretty simple, and some of those terms are complicated. And while we're not going to get into all of those different terms today, what I do want to talk about is what sort of method should you be using or can you use in order to collect and store your data. It's going to be kind of difficult to use like a stopwatch or you might not have someone that can like blow a whistle and say go and have one of those like tick, 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 tick things. So you're probably going to want to have some sort of device, especially in this day and age, that you can use to store and collect your data and then upload it to some other place later on. Now, when we're talking about that, there are two main things that you can use in order to store and collect data. The first would be apps that are on a smartphone. Now, when we're talking about apps that are on a smartphone, we're talking about things like Map My Run, Map My Ride, Strava, and other different sorts of things. Runkeeper is another one that's really popular, and they have different apps that are on Android phones. They have different apps for Mac phones, iPhones. They have different apps for Windows phones, but I don't know anyone who actually has a Windows phone. So when you're looking at all those different apps, some of them are free and some of them cost money. Some of them are going to have simple information, such as how far did you run, how fast did it take you, and some are going to have more complicated information, such as what was your RPM, how many steps did you take, and what was your cadence. Now, the good news about using phones and apps that are on phones is that you're already going to use the phone anyway. You already have the phone with you. You're probably going to take your phone with you on the run, so then it's okay to use it. But the bad news with regards to phone apps is that they use GPS, and GPS takes a lot of battery. Battery life is really a big problem when it comes to using an app for a phone that collects your data. No matter if you're using Strava or Runkeeper or any other thing, the battery life that gets taken out might be a problem, especially if you're going for a longer run. If you're doing a half marathon or you're doing a marathon, then you might not be able to make it through the whole run with the battery life that's on your phone. In addition to those other things I was saying about smartphones, when you're talking about battery life, that battery life might be something that you need in case there's an emergency. If you get lost or you get sick or you need for someone to come get you, you don't want for that phone to be out of juice when you need it. So that's another reason why I'm a little bit hazy with regards to using a phone for your data collection device. When I was first running, when I was first cycling, I did use a phone for that device, but now I don't use them anymore because it's a little bit safer to have a separate watch. Another thing that's important to note is that since we're triathletes, we're going to be using these things in triathlons, obviously. And you can't use a smartphone in the swim because your phone is probably not waterproof. But what's also important to note is that USAT rules mandate that you can't have a smartphone with you on the cycle and on the run. And if they see you with one, you could be subject to a penalty. So that's one thing that's a detractor from using a smartphone when you're doing your training. The other method that you can use in order to keep track of your data, how fast you run, how fast you cycle, etc., would be some sort of watch. There are a billion different watches out there, Garmin has watches, Polar has watches, other folks have watches. There are just a ton of watches, and they're all over the place. You can find some online, you can find some in stores. I find that using a watch, such as a Garmin, is a much better alternative. The first reason is it has its own power source. You plug in a Garmin to either the wall, or you plug it into your computer, and then you don't have to worry about your phone going dead, especially if you're in an emergency. If your watch goes dead, then you don't have any information for that run or for that ride, but you're still in a better situation than if you were using your phone and your phone went dead. The second thing is that in many situations, a watch has a lot more data that can be taken. A watch might be able to use other information and other instruments, such as power meters, such as heart rate monitors, and other things, in order to monitor more closely things that you're looking for on your run and on your cycle, and things that your coach is going to be looking for too. The third reason is that you can actually take a watch with you on every part of the triathlon per USAT rules. Earlier we were talking about how a smartphone can't be taken in the pool, a smartphone can't be taken in the ocean or in the lake or whatever if you're doing an open water swim, and you can't take them on the cycle on the run because USAT rules say that you can't. However, a watch does not have that same problem. You can take a watch with you in the swim, you can take a watch with you on the cycle and on the run. An example of a watch that I have is this. This is the Garmin 910, and this is the heart strap that I have. Now, what the bad side about watches is that they can be expensive. However, if you have Craigslist or you have Facebook or even in the IABT group, you might be able to find someone that's able to sell you a watch for a little bit less. Okay, so that's it for this week's Training Corner. My name is Jeremy Gordon. If you have any questions about anything that I've explained, please let me know in the comments, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.